Make absolutely sure that you got that. Once again, they did not adjust for inflation, and it was not as a share of GNP. Here is the real chart. You can see that Reagan's debt level, while high, was below that of Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy, Harry Truman, and of course, Franklin Roosevelt. Once again, if you overlap the two, you get a stunning visual picture of how bad the bias is in this textbook. One chart's an accident, two is deliberate. Investor's Business Daily ran this particular image on the front page back in August 1997 under an article called "Why Johnny Can't Learn History." Johnny can't learn history because the historians are lying to Johnny. Now, we come to the Cold War, where Reagan used the economy, especially information technologies, to form the basis of the one weapon that would defeat the Soviet Union, the Strategic Defense Initiative. In 1983, Reagan made a speech. He kept the contents of that speech a secret from all but his closest supporters because he knew if it got out in advance that people would start picking it apart. In the famous Strategic Defense Initiative speech, SDI speech, Reagan talked about using our technology and engineering to develop a means to destroy Soviet missiles in flight. He never used the words space, laser, Star Wars. He didn't use any of those terms. He just said, let's look into it and see what we can do to protect the population rather than have to avenge them with another nuclear strike that incinerates millions and millions of people. The press, of course, hated Reagan, and so they immediately tried to spin this by calling it Star Wars. Now, what the press didn't understand is times have changed. When I was growing up, there was a TV show called Buck Rogers. And Buck Rogers was really hokey, really stupid. No one had ever gone to the moon yet. Heck, we hadn't even really fired people up in rockets yet. Okay? So it was something way out there. And if you wanted to ridicule something, you said, oh, that's Buck Rogers-ish. So the press tried to do this with SDI by calling it Star Wars. The problem was, most Americans have seen Star Wars. Almost all of you guys have seen Star Wars. Some of you many times. Some of you won't admit it. You're a little flaky. You've seen it hundreds of times. Okay, I've seen all Star Wars movies dozens of times. I even like The Phantom Menace. And yes, I like Jar Jar Binks. Okay, so soon. So most Americans had seen Star Wars. They connected with the idea of using laser beams to shoot down rockets. Yeah, what's wrong with that? Sounds reasonable to me. You know? And so this drove the press crazy that Reagan was able to do this. Instead, they and the historians tried to act like it was this guy, Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, who ended the Cold War. And I have a number of quotations like this in my forthcoming book, 48 Lies of History. But take my word for it, you can find in all these textbooks various quotations that say, well, Gorbachev is the one that ended the Cold War. I'll give you just two. According to James West Davidson in Nation of Nations, quote, Gorbachev's reform policies led not only to the collapse of the Soviet Empire, but also to the breakup of the Soviet Union itself. Oh, this far-reaching guy, this visionary guy actually destroyed communism. And I thought he was a communist. Huh? Silly me. Gorbachev, said Tyndall and She in America, A Narrative History, Gorbachev backed off Soviet imperial ambitions. I guess that was after he invaded Angola and Afghanistan. Then he backed off. By the way, this photo is hard to see here, but if you notice, Gorbachev had this birthmark up on his forehead. And I swear, because I remember I was watching him a lot during these years, Gorbachev's birthmark would change shape to assume the shape of whatever map of whatever country they were invading at the time. When they were going into Afghanistan, I swear he had the map of Afghanistan on his forehead. It starts changing to Angola, and then everybody goes, oh, look, he's going to Angola next, okay? So it's interesting, if you see a picture of him today, it's almost gone. There's no birthmark there because the Soviet Union doesn't exist. He doesn't have an empire anymore. By the way, why do you suppose so many Americans caught on to the notion of SDI and Star Wars? I'll give you one more example. If you've seen the movies, you know that the evil emperor is this craggy old guy, looks about 1 billion years old, right? If you think about the Soviet dictators, they had 4 of them in a 4-year period in the early 1970s. There was Brezhnev, and he was like 1 million years old, and he died. And then they had the aptly named Andropov, and he dropped off. And then they had Chernenko, and he lasted like 6 months before he died. Every one of these guys looked like the evil emperor. Yes, young Jedi, you shall die. They look like that guy. Okay? So Americans are, yeah, that's evil emperor right there. And then Gorbachev is like Darth Vader. You know, Reagan, you know, we will beat you. So you can see Gorby and listen to some of the things he says when Reagan introduces Star Wars into the equation. He said in 1985, Gorbachev, we know what's going on. You're inspired by illusions. You think you're ahead of us in technological information. You think you're ahead of us in technology, that you can use these things to gain superiority over the Soviet Union. Later on, he said at Geneva, even now, due to computer technology, one side could get ahead in space, but we can match any challenge, though you might not think so. In fact, Gorbachev was terrified by our technology. Reagan did not talk a lot about computers. He didn't write a lot about computers, but it's very clear from his overall view of Star Wars and some of these other programs that he understood the power possessed by the American computing industry. We were dominating the world in computers in the 1980s. The Soviets could not begin to compete with us in computers. Reagan then took a part of the 1979 Export Control Act, and he found a way to deny computers and computer parts to the Soviets in terms of trade. So now they couldn't trade for them, they couldn't steal them, and they couldn't invent them. There's no Soviet Steve Jobs-ski or Bill Gates-ski. You won't find one. So Reagan was very clear that he understood this, that cost per unit of computing power was plummeting while computing power itself was absolutely soaring. It was this kind of computing power that he knew would lead to this. That's the target. This is a cruise missile fired from 978 miles away, about to drop on a pylon this big around. That means we could have put a cruise missile inside the bathroom of the Kremlin. Now you think about what's happening today in terms of North Korea. That crazy pot-bellied dog-eating dictator. Okay? You know the guy. Wong Wei. I'm so Wong Wei and sad Wei Wong. Your teachers don't get that. They don't know what's going on. What the hell is he talking about? What is this womanly stuff, you know? Is that Dean Martin? Is that some Dean Martin stuff? So, you know, if you don't want them to know that you saw that movie, just look straight ahead. Nobody will know that you ever saw the movie. That guy. He knows that we can do this. And that's why he is starting to back down and to come to some agreements. Reagan envisioned this. Gorbachev envisioned this. It was these information technologies that Reagan realized would eventually dominate everything, would make Star Wars a reality. And so that is why, when he left office, Reagan said, quote, "If we showed the political resolve to develop SDI, the Soviets would have to face the awful truth that they did not have the resources to continue building a huge offensive arsenal and a defensive one simultaneously. By simply issuing the threat of employing American technology, Reagan threw down a marker on the table that the Soviet Union could not match. It's not far off to say that Ronald Reagan won the Cold War with a single speech, and that is why many historians hate Ronald Reagan.